Thank you for sharing that with us. All right. I'm going to do an official welcome to A New Way. And first, I'm going to turn this off. There we go. And that will be better for everyone. I'll hold both. We didn't plan this microphone swap here. So it is so good to see so many faces and faces that we've seen before and faces that I have not seen before. And I'm so thankful that you're all here in our space. We are A New Way, and we are meeting here on Friday nights. There's a cake over there. This is 3 years of us meeting here on Friday nights. And next week, we will actually be starting to meet up in a smaller, more quaint library space in 214. So you can find A New Way meeting up there, and that's just a great place to go if you're like, I need people. I need someone to talk to. I want to share my story, or I don't want to share my story, but I would love to hear someone else's story. Or just to come and be like, I'm so mad. All of that is safe. So that's on Friday nights, 7 o'clock. On March 14th, we're actually doing it a little bit differently, and you'll want to follow on social media to know where. But we're actually going to meet at my house on that night, and I'd love to have you join us for that. You can contact through the New Way email, and I'm not just going to pass out my address to everybody, but you are all welcome. It's just a night of belonging. It's so nice to share food with people and to just be in a home, like the old churches used to be. And sometimes just coming back to that feels really good. So, and provides safety that people need. Speaking of safety and comfort, restrooms, we have multiple options for you. There is a single stall restroom right outside this door through here and immediately to the left. That's just one stall with one door. If you go out this way into the lobby, that is more traditional, gendered, lots of stalls, restroom out there. Feel free to get up at any point and help yourself to food and beverages. Again, with the cupcakes, those are available. Anything else that I'm missing? Donna? No? Okay. Youth Outlook. OutSpoken does a lot of work with Youth Outlook, and Youth Outlook is an organization that is designed to be a support for queer youth. So there is a box over here, over there, if you would love to donate to what Youth Outlook is doing or what A New Way is doing. We would love any generosity that you have to offer for that. I think that's it. So I'm going to turn it back over to Archie so we can continue with our storytelling. Allison, thank you again so much.
All right. I just want to take a poll out there. How many people out there speak to, someone who's passed, or they feel like they have a guardian angel that they communicate with as well? Just make some noise. Put your hands up. I do too, and that story just reminded me of that, and I think it's something we all have in common that we don't quite talk about. At OutSpoken, we always go into a little bit of queer history, so I found something really interesting today. It is the last day of Black History Month, so I thought I would share this. Black queer history includes significant contributions to American arts and culture. From the Harlem Renaissance to contemporary music and fashion, Black queer individuals have played central roles in defining American aesthetics and storytelling. The Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, for example, was driven by several Black queer artists, including poets like Langston Hughes and novelists like Richard Bruce Nugent, whose work celebrated Black identity while also subtly addressing queer themes. These artists expanded narratives around Black life in America, blending the experiences of race and sexuality into a singular expressive voice. William Dorsey Swann, anyone heard of him before? Was the first drag queen. Swann was born into slavery in Maryland just before the Civil War. In the 1880s, as a young adult, he moved to Washington, D.C. to find work to help support his parents and siblings. In Washington, he found the Emancipation Day Parade, an enormous celebration commemorating the end of slavery in the U.S. Capitol. The highlights of the parade were called Queens, beautifully crowned Black women who personified African Americans' newfound freedom. The Queens of Emancipation Day so inspired Swann that he adopted the title Queen for himself at the secret dance that he and his friends called a drag. The word drag possibly comes from a contraction of grand rag, which is an early term for a masquerade ball. So, as we have learned, Black people invented everything in this country. So, stop having disrespect. All right. Our first teller for today, give me a moment to pull up their bio, but it's Michelle. So if you want to start making your way up here. All right. Michelle Jansen is a retired educator. Michelle has a family with her cat, her wife, her wife cat, and their dog. I'm a great MC, you guys. Michelle admits she's obsessed with posting on social media and probably using 12-step meeting called SMAA, Social Media Addicts Anonymous. When not posting on social media for those 5 minutes of the day, Michelle searches online for great recipes to try out on cat. Are you still alive? Oh, you're still alive. Great. In the spring, she enjoys working in her flower beds and taking care of the lawn. She's haphazardly working on a van conversion. Sounds lesbian. And looks forward to a few summer road trips this year. Please welcome Michelle to the stage. You know, when Kat and I first met, we had a joke about, I can't pronounce it, Schrodinger's cat? Schrodinger's cat. And when we first met face to face, she said the cat's alive. I honestly didn't know what that meant. She's smarter than I am. She had explained it. All right, I'm looking out over the audience and I see my pastor and my grungy friends. So, hope I don't offend everybody tonight. All right, I have the best chance of not doing that if I just read from the script. So that's what I will do. If you hear anything squawking from this one, she's probably saying land the plane or get back to the script. An alcoholic in front of a microphone is a very dangerous thing. All right. The title of my story tonight is Falling from Hate into Love. Throughout our marriage, I usually take time on Sweethearts Day. Some people call that Valentine's Day, but God knows the history, so we call it Sweethearts Day at our house. I usually take time near Sweethearts Day to write a love letter to my wife, Kat. This year, I was too busy posting on social media to write her that letter. So, sweetheart, please consider this my love letter to you this year. For the rest of you, it's just my story. So here we go. For as long as I can remember, I've always had this fantasy lover. I call her my beautiful, elusive, one true love. That's Beatle or Bottle if you pick out the illusion. She lives in a bottle now, so I've learned to just call her Jeannie for short. It's too much of a mouthful. Lesbians, walking with Jesus, no LGBTQs. Anyway, sidebar. I'm getting back to the script. Okay. I grew up in a community of Christians who taught me that God hates the gays. So as a gay, I figured God hated me too. For a long time, I was kind of okay with that because I hated myself. Not because I was gay, but because I was me. I hated myself. When I finished college and first decided to come out of the closet, I began chasing that fantasy lover, hoping to find the fruition of that in human skin. It was the late 80s and early 90s, and queer folks met in gay bars and nightclubs. So off I went in search of that beautiful, elusive, one true love that I call Jeannie. My fantasy was unfettered, and I went out nightly after work searching. After a time, I finally found my Jeannie. She was in a bottle. At first, I was timid and would only flirt with Jeannie. Sometimes it was just a glance, but then I began to gaze at her. Suddenly, one night, I reached for her, and she enveloped me. We danced all evening long, sometimes slow, sometimes fast. I took Jeannie home with me that night at last call, and we continued cavorting long into the early morning. It was the start of a beautiful relationship. I was completely smitten with my Jeannie in a bottle,
And I continued to fall for her wiles throughout my 20s, 30s, and 40s. I dated a number of women and even partnered with a few, but none of them gave me what my genie did. So I'd sneak away and spend time with my genie as much as I could. I tried to keep my genie out of sight, hoping nobody would discover our affair. Some didn't know, others knew and just didn't care, but others were keenly aware of her and gave me that ultimatum. With those threats to abandon me, I scaled back my affair with Jeannie for just long enough to ease the pressure. But without my willingness, and by this time, even my ability to part with my Jeannie, the partners began to walk away, one after another. Eventually, I just didn't care. Oops. My Jeannie in a bottle was there for me. She was my ever-present comfort, always waiting and wanting me. The love who stayed when all others had left. The love who brought joy to my sorrow and pleasure to my pain. Just being with my genie in a bottle was such an ego boost. With her, and I see Kat edited this out, I'm going with it. With her, I was as funny as Robin Williams. I was as good looking as Hugh Grant. I'm trying to remember who I wrote. And I could dance like John Travolta. My genie, that beautiful, lucid one true love, moved me daily, and I gave in to her every time. See, I loved my genie, and I thought she loved me too. But what I couldn't see was that Jeannie never really loved me at all. She couldn't. She was a fantasy full of promise and without any hope for a future. She was a manifestation of my efforts to love myself. But the best Jeannie could do was keep me from hating myself too much. And she did that. All that I had to do when those feelings crept in was reach for my Jeannie, and I'd hate myself a little less each time. I'd pick her up on my way home from work each day, and she'd keep me company through the evening and often into the night. Over time, my relationship with Jeannie became the most important thing in my life. As I continued to date women, if any of them tried to come between me and my Jeannie in the bottle, I chose my Jeannie every time. Then in 2016, I met this woman who turned my life upside down. Kat was so unlike any woman I ever dated. We met online, and our relationship began through emails and phone calls. In getting to know Kat, I became very interested in her. I wanted to meet her in person. But what was I to do? My Jeannie was beginning to demand more and more of my time. My Jeannie always preferred that we stay home alone together. She seldom let me leave her at home and go out with friends. She would never allow for an out-of-town road trip without her. But aha, there was Amtrak. My Jeannie in a bottle could ride the train with me and keep me company until I deboarded at Union Station. Then I could leave her there and meet Kat for a weekend. I'd return to my beautiful, elusive, one true love on the train, and we would ride home together. And so I did that for just a couple of months as Kat and I began dating long distance, Amtrak dating as we called it. As we dated, I began to think that I might like to trade in my Jeannie for a real relationship with Kat. I really liked Kat and thought that maybe, perhaps, she might just be the real one true love. But part of my self-hatred was feeling like I was never good enough. I could never be Kat's one true love back. By this time, my relationship with my Jeannie was becoming more and more abusive. She had me in her grip, and she wasn't letting go without a fight. If I wanted real love with Kat, my Jeannie in a bottle would have to go. Most relationships end in a fight, and my relationship was no different. It was an ever-present physical and mental battle with Jeannie. About 3 months into my dating Kat, we went on a long weekend trip to Savannah, Georgia. I'd always wanted to see a drag show at Club One where Lady Chablis, had performed. It was a bar, and I suspected Jeannie would probably be there too. But I conned myself into believing that I had the strength to ignore Jeannie and stay focused on Kat. So we went to Club One, and while Kat enjoyed the show, I suddenly realized I had no power in my struggle. I snuck away to chase my Jeannie in a bottle once more. I spotted Jeannie hovering behind the bar. It seemed she was waiting there just for me. As some folks do with ex-lovers, I began a conversation with my ex-lover Jeannie, and within minutes she warmed up to me. Before long, I let her tickle my throat and caress my head. All the while, Kat waited patiently for me at our table. Kat never made mention of my infidelity that night. Only later in our relationship did Kat tell me she knew about that brief tryst with Jeannie that night because she could smell the scent of my Jeannie all over my body when I got back. Since Kat was now aware of my Jeannie, I was able to share my struggles. Kat did her best, and she made the decision to stay as I continued to struggle to free myself from Jeannie's cunning, baffling, and powerful grip. I fought hard to ignore those silent whispers and luring gazes when I'd run into Jeannie in restaurants and at parties. But I knew I wanted a real love relationship with Kat, so I had to stay away from my Jeannie. And I did for a while. I was falling into Kat's love with me with hope that somehow that would be enough. For a while, her love for me did mask my own self-hatred, but her love proved to be just a band-aid. It just wasn't enough to heal me like Jeannie had always promised to do. Nothing seemed to work, so I decided to heal myself. Kat stuck with me through that too as I tried to heal myself. But it seemed that the more love Kat showered on me, the more I felt hate for myself. I'd repeatedly break things off with Kat, not because I didn't care for her, but because I just couldn't care enough for myself. After one of these breakups on a snowy Monday evening, Kat drove down from Chicago to St. Louis. She'd written on a snowy at work. Okay. She'd written me a letter and she wanted to read it to me in person. I cried as she read me those beautiful words, expressing what she saw in me, my character assets, my loving nature, and all the good things she'd experienced with me. Kat came to offer me hope. But see, hope is a thing with feathers, and my wings were just too broken. I said goodbye, and Kat headed back to Chicago. It was very painful to watch Kat just walk away. It was a much deeper pain than I'd ever felt with others who left me. To alleviate that pain, I decided to return to an ex from my past. What a great idea, right? It was a bad idea, but I no longer had Kat and no longer was reaching for my Jeannie to soothe the ache. I needed some sort of love, even if it was torturous, and it soon turned out to be just that. In an effort to reunite with that ex, we took a trip to the West Coast, and it was a disaster. I was a disaster. That ex decided to leave me because she could see my self-hate and my longing for relief from my dear Jeannie. She hopped on a plane and flew home. I felt completely and utterly abandoned, sitting in a rental car somewhere in the middle of Oregon. Completely hopeless. I decided I could make it as far as Portland. I could find a haunt where I was certain Jeannie would be, and I would let her do me in, this time for good. My plan was to imbibe in all the pleasure of Jeannie in a bottle one more time. I would let her course through my veins and flood my mind. Then I would take her with me and let her lure me off the edge of the nearest mountain highway. As I set out on this last encounter with my lover Jeannie, I had a moment of clarity. I tried to reach out to my best friend back in St. Louis. I wanted to see if he could help me keep from ending myself. In a panic, I scrolled through my phone for Joe in my contacts. But it happened that I hit the next number by mistake. That number I accidentally hit was Kat's. As she answered my call, she was on her way into her annual review with her supervisor, but she told her boss she needed to take my call. Later, she told me that somehow she knew our Creator was in this. She told me that earlier that morning she'd heard a cardinal chirping relentlessly, to the point where Kat raised her hands to the sky and asked, "What do you want from me?" Kat does that from time to time. When she told me that story, I remembered thinking about the idea of how when a cardinal shows up, it's a visit from a loved one in heaven. I don't know if that's true, but I like to think it is. For me, that squawking cardinal was my dad. See, my dad never let me quit a job before it was finished. So in my thinking, he was telling Kat to make sure I didn't leave this planet before I finished my chores. Anyway, Kat stayed on the phone with me and somehow convinced me to just fly home from Portland that day. Once at the airport, I tried to trade in my next day's ticket for an earlier flight, but United had no empty seats. I tried Delta too. I refused to stand in the Southwest line because actually I'd rather kill myself than ride home on a flight with a bunch of crying babies. I see you can relate. With no open seat, hopelessness set in once more, so I headed back toward the parking garage, back to Plan A. Then I saw one more ticket counter, Alaskan Airlines. I went to the counter and asked about a flight. They had one seat left on the puddle jumper to Seattle and one seat left from Seattle to St. Louis from there. But that one-way ticket would cost me $600. $600? It may as well have been $6 million. I could not fathom spending that kind of money for a ride home, especially since I already had a ticket for the next day on United from Seattle. But I knew if I didn't fly home that day, I wouldn't live to see the next. So I laid my credit card on the counter, and with tears streaming down my face, I said, I just need to sleep in my own bed tonight. The ticket agent must have seen my despair, and so she asked me to wait a minute while she made a phone call. When she hung up the phone, she handed me my credit card back and said, I've booked you a seat, and this one is on us. I was stunned, but I was eager to get to the gate so I wouldn't miss that flight to Seattle and then the connecting flight home. The plane was scheduled to leave in 20 minutes, so I did my best O.J. Simpson, and I made it to the gate just in time. Once on the plane from Seattle heading home, the flight attendant came down the aisle with a drink cart and asked if I wanted anything. The woman seated next to me told me to drink up because we are in premium seats, and so we could have our fill of anything we wanted. I was stunned that Alaskan Airlines had put me in premium seating. Nobody ever treated me that way. But in that moment, I saw my Creator. In this mess, I simply turned to the attendant and I said, no thanks. I leaned back in my seat and I fell asleep. Now, I'd love to tell you that that was the last time I fantasized about my beautiful one true love, genie in a bottle, that I was finally free from her, but I wasn't. All of those other women, that ex, even Kat, no human on earth could love me more than I hated myself. And I returned to my fantasy of self-love. I returned to my genie and hoped she would love me once more. But I began to believe that there might be this real love locked away for me somewhere. And somehow, I believe Kat held the key. So after a short time passed, I reached out to Kat again. She had met someone and was considering moving on. But once again, the Creator showed up as I somehow mustered the courage and made one last grand gesture to Kat. We reunited, and this time for good. I proposed to her on July 27, 2018. She and I married in April of the next year. Ready for that happily ever after ending now? Yeah, so was I. But even this was not bad. See, even in my marriage to a woman who loved me with everything she had, I still fantasized about my Jeannie in a bottle. Jeannie had not left my mind. In fact, she showed up even on my wedding day. Having just confessed my love for Kat and accepted a sentence of life without parole from a Cook County judge, our friends took us newlyweds out to a celebratory lunch. It was such a joyful day. I'd like to say it was the best day ever. And it was, until one of our friends ordered a champagne toast. No, not Jeannie. Not on my wedding day. I really didn't care for champagne, but I toasted and I politely sipped. And so, even with my new bride and close friends, even in doing all the downtown Chicago touristy things I love, even in that, my one sip of Jeannie took me right back to my fantasy. See, it just takes one sip for an alcoholic. One taste of her and that fantasy reignites. The chase for that illusion kicks in once more. That evening, as we checked into our hotel for our mini-moon, I spotted my Jeannie in the lounge just off the lobby. And even though the hotel upgraded us to this really cool suite on the top floor to enhance our nuptials, even with the cool views across the Chicago skyline, even with this much of a view of Lake Michigan between the buildings, even with all of that, I left Kat alone on our wedding night and went down to find my Jeannie in the lounge. I spent the entire evening chasing Jeannie's love once again. It was nearly midnight before I made my way back up to the room where I found Kat. While waiting patiently for me, she'd fallen asleep. Kat never spoke ill of me for how I abandoned her on our wedding night. She just helped me settle into our Chicagoland home and tolerated as best she could as I sought privacy with my Jeannie again and again. I don't know how she put up with my passionate extramarital affair, especially as it kept me away from Kat more and more each day, but my Jeannie came first. Kat and I began to grow apart, or rather, I should say, she grew. I shrank back into the depths of my fantasy love with my Jeannie. It would be about another year and a half before I escaped Jeannie's grip once more. But by this time, I needed help from others who'd escaped Jeannie's grip and lived to tell about it. On September 23rd, 2020, I sought that help. 28 days later, when Kat picked me up and took me to a meeting of others who survived a love affair with Jeannie, it was in that moment that I knew I had fallen in love with Kat. See, during those 28 days, I was introduced to a power who could love me more than I hated myself. As we left that place, Kat knew I needed to be with others who found that power too. She took me to them. We have spent the last 4.5 years building a life filled with the power of that love whom we call our Creator. We sought out a community of friends who know our Creator as well. My heart swells in the company of others who know my Creator. Not a love for my Creator so much as enjoying my Creator's love for me. Somehow my Creator has helped me fall from hate into love. Love for me and love for my Kat. Last year for Christmas, I bought Kat this little sign that hangs in our house, and it says, "I still remember the days I prayed for what I have now." It reminds me that even my unspoken prayers get answered. The life I share with my wife, Kat, is far better than any I could have thought to pray for. But my Creator's love is more than I ever could have imagined. I know the fantasy of my Jeannie will never leave me. She will always be there stalking me with her lusty eyes. She will be in the back of my mind until the day I die. That's how this thing works. But I know that if I can keep 12 steps clear of her, I have a better chance. All I have to do is surrender to my Creator as I fall from hate into God's love. But it's not a one and done. I have to surrender each day. I love you, my darling wife, and I'm grateful that you surrender each day too. Thank you. Give it up for Kat. And Michelle.
I can't believe she got that Valentine's note in on the last day of February. You are a patient woman. Also, I want to give a shout out to Southwest Airlines because they fly me everywhere, and I did not appreciate that. I'm a Rapid Rewards member, guys. Our next storyteller is Joe. He's a friend of mine. He has told stories all over Chicago. He's going to tell you a very serious story about a medical condition. So, brace yourselves. Welcome into the stage.
I walked out of the hospital room with my checkout papers in my hand, looking for the checkout desk. I passed the 3 medical students I met earlier, and I started to greet them by smiling and raising my hand and started to say hello. Was it on?
No, I just.
Oh, sorry. I tell stories all over the city. But anyway, and I started to greet them by smiling and raising my hand, and I started to say hello, but I stopped when I recognized utter panic on all of their faces. One of them pulled out his phone, and they all physically bumped into each other as they scrambled to look at it. Then they pressed into the wall and avoided all eye contact with me as I walked past them. Now I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have time to figure out what, because as soon as I turned the corner, I was immediately at the checkout desk. And behind the checkout desk was the nurse I met earlier. She looked at me, her eyes widened, she smiled, there was a beat, and then she belted out a laugh that was way too loud for the room. This made me nervous, because this was the nurse, and those were the medical students that were with me when I had my colonoscopy. When she finally stopped laughing, she said, and again way too loudly for the room, "You really had a good time in there. You must be a cheap date, and you begged to do it again." Like everyone, I've seen viral videos of people coming out of anesthesia, so I arrived already afraid of what I might say. I explained this to her and apologized for what I might have said as I was regaining consciousness. She laughed and told me that I was never unconscious. I was given a twilight drug, which meant that I was able to talk and to move throughout the entire encounter, or the entire procedure, and she told me that I never stopped. And then she started laughing again. Now this upset me because I knew what I'd likely said. The night before the colonoscopy, I was doing the prep work, and I was drinking a gallon jug filled with a strong laxative. I was on the toilet when my best friend called. He's my best friend, so I answered. He asked, "What you doing?" I said, "I'm douching. I had that colonoscopy tomorrow." He said, "Oh, that's right. Well, don't forget to ask him to take you to dinner afterwards." I said, "I will never make a joke that pedestrian. If it can appear on a 70s sitcom, I'm not saying it." As a point of pride, I had just learned the word pedestrian in this context the night before on Project Runway, and I already used it correctly in a sentence. But anyway, he and I started coming up with jokes for cable TV. To be clear, I had no intention of saying any of these things. It was just a fun way to pass the time while I was on the toilet. But intention or not, it appeared I had put on a show. I took a deep breath and asked the nurse, what exactly did I say? I was hoping she'd put me at ease and tell me that I just mumbled some things and I didn't make any sense and that there was no need to worry. But that's not what happened. With a sadistic gleam in her eye and a smile on her face, she asked, "Do you really want to know?" I don't know why, but I said yes. She leaned forward and invited me to lean forward and started to whisper. Now, whispering was a very bad sign because she basically just shouted to everyone that could hear I was a cheap date, and now she was concerned about people overhearing. I should have run. On a good note, I kept to my script and added improvements. On a bad note, I kept to my script and added improvements. I should let you know that when I was having the colonoscopy, the room was full. There was me, 5 hot men, and this nurse. The 3 medical students were tall, thin, and nerdy, and they were all at that sweet and sexy age where you are adorable no matter what you do. And I remember when I was introduced and shook all of their hands, they each radiated sincerity. They all said a version of, I am so grateful to you that you are allowing me the chance to be part of your healthcare journey. These were the 3 medical students that ran into a wall rather than make eye contact. And then there was the resident. Now, if he was an actor, he would have been a leading man, and he would have just reached his leading man age. At 9 a.m., he had a perfectly coiffed 5 o'clock shadow. I don't remember what he said or him talking at all, but I do remember that when I shook his hand, I leaned in and tried to smell him. And then there was the attending, physically the biggest in the room and in total control of everything. He also looked like he might have just done a vanity pump because I could see the outline of his muscles through his lab coat. I noticed him noticing me, noticing his arms. We'll call him Dr. Daddy. To reiterate, we have 3 different flavors of male hotness in this nurse. I was doomed before it started. The nurse said that when we first started the procedure, I said, what's going on back there? And then in a disappointed tone, I added, well, it's kind of underwhelming. I mean, it is long enough, but I prefer girth. And then I added my first improvement and pointed to Dr. Daddy and said, like him. I then started laughing and giggling and moving around and saying, it tickles, it tickles, it tickles. Then I looked around at everyone and said, what in a reach around? And here is where I really went to town with improvements. I explained that I worked as a standardized patient and that I taught medical students all around Chicago the prostate exam, and that when doing that, I always taught the reach around. I told them that if they had gone to the University of Chicago, Northwestern, or UIC, they certainly would have learned it. And then with a disgusted look on her face, she told me that I demonstrated. To finish off the exam, I pushed my ass back, looked over my shoulder, and said, harder, boys, I am not made of glass. When the procedure ended, she said I begged to do it again. But after all the men left and I was just in the room with her, she said I lost interest and went to sleep. As she was talking, I felt the blood draining from my face. I felt my stomach falling and my knees getting weaker. I was embarrassed. I felt shame. I felt guilty. I felt dirty. I felt exposed. And I felt rage at this woman. She should have lied or said nothing at all. Instead, in a distinct air of, I'm going to teach you a lesson, she leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, I've never seen anything like it, and chuckled to herself. I said my goodbyes, hurried down the corridor to the exit, and prayed that I didn't run into anyone on the way out. When I got to my friend's car, he noticed the expression on my face and how pale I looked. He asked if I was okay. He thought I was having a physical reaction to the drugs. I told him that's not it and informed him of the twilight drug and that I basically said everything that we came up with the night before. He looked at me, his eyes widened, he smiled, there was a beat, and then he belted out a laugh that was way too loud for the car. I was crushed. Here my best friend was laughing at me. I told him how terrible I felt and how I basically just molested myself in front of kids half my age. He laughed harder at that. But when he saw the look on my face, he said, hey, Joe, it's not your fault. They gave you an audience, they gave you a drug, and they stuck something up your ass. What did they expect was going to happen? And besides, you can't be the first person that attempted to fuck a colonoscopy machine. I looked at him. I felt my eyes widen. I felt a smile. And in a beat, my emotions changed from shame and anger to joy and amusement. And then I belted out a laugh that was way too loud for the car. The events of the day were unchanged. They were exactly the same. but a best friend and laughter changed my perspective, changed the way I looked at the day. He started driving and said, "Now tell me everything." And I did, and we laughed all the way home.
All right, we're about halfway through, so this is when we take like a 5 to 7 minute break. Go to use the bathroom, go attack that refreshment table, and then we have a few more stories for you. That's 8:07. Okay, all right. Good.
Yeah. Grab what you need. If you were here last time, you might remember that if you're late, I start singing weird Christian songs from my church days growing up. So we want to stay away from that. Okay, so 5 minutes and then we're back.
Oh my God. Find your seats, people. This is being broadcast.
We have about 30 seconds before I start singing songs that you don't want to hear. Actually, while you're coming back to your seats, one thing that Michelle's story got me thinking about is that the gathering that's going to be at my house, in case you also have genie in a bottle that you are staying away from, the gathering at my house on the 14th will have no genies. No genies, no bottles, okay? So at my house on the 14th, we are having a genie-free gathering. I'm excited because I'm going to show you how that there's like all these fun sodas that you can make. Instagram thinks that I'm Mormon because I have a lot of kids, and so I get all these Mormon people, and they love soda, and they make like weird stuff with soda. They do like dirty sodas. So we're gonna have a dirty soda bar there. So no genies at my house on the 14th. Okay, you have like 15 seconds, so I'm not going to sing because everyone's pretty much ready. And I'm going to hand it back to Archie, and we're going to keep going. You can join us when you're ready. Thanks, Archie.
I actually just saw Book of Mormon a couple weeks ago, and yes, that is the right word. I didn't know what I was going to say, but iconic. You know if you know. If you don't know, it's your loss. All right, our next storyteller is Patrick Fish. Patrick grew up in a white moderate home near Oswego. That sounds like where white moderate homes live. Experiences have led him to question, deconstruct, and reimagine his worldview, ideology, and theology. Pat is a father of three, a pastor, a lacrosse coach, a consultant. Most importantly, he is an ally, advocate, and community builder. Please welcome Patrick to the stage.
All right, I am going to just speak from my heart. So bear with me. Is there a time limit on this though? Okay, you're going to be like, yeah, pastor's talking to me. All right, okay, well. I want to acknowledge just the brokenness that we all have to live in, the current climate that we're all in. And this is something I've been reading as I begin my day. Spiritual practice is very big to me as well. How I intentionally start my day, end my day, having those life habits help me to stay joyful. And joyful is a way to be resistant to the chaos that is our world. So this is something that I read to myself in the morning. This is instructions on living in a broken world. Lean into community. Seek out love. Applaud the good you see. Keep paying attention. Talk to your neighbors. Dance to the music and embrace art. Look for love and small joys. Take breaks and relish in nourishing your body. Donate what you can. Linger at the dinner table with your friends and family. Check in with your people. Let yourself grieve. Love one another as deeply as you can. The storm is certainly upon us, but we must hold on. Don't give up. We're here together. So my talk tonight is called Authentic Voice, and I'm very big about voice. When I was a kid, I had my voice taken from me. My parents were both in horticulture. They loved plants. I do not share their love for plants. But you can imagine two horticulture folks, we didn't have a whole lot of money growing up. And so we couldn't afford good daycare. And so I and my brother were put in a home daycare where the daycare's older son abused me, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old. I remember that closet still to this day. I remember antagonizing that young man so that my brother would be safe. And at the age of 6, my whole world was taken from me. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and they talked about a God who protected God's people, and I called bullshit. Church was so irrelevant and didn't speak to the atrocities that I was experiencing. And for a long time, I lived very angry and very ashamed that it was my fault that I had brought this upon myself. Different tone than you, Tom. Sorry, brother. But I'm going to tell you, fast forward to now I'm pastor, right? The shit. And that's what God does. And my story is more about what God does than what anything I did. Because truthfully, I should be in a ditch somewhere. I too had my struggles with the genie. I am 3 years sober as of June 28th. Stonewell. It felt right, the anniversary of Stonewell, that would be my sober date. And so I'm going to be 3 years. But man, that trauma lives with you, and it's in your bones, it's in your body. You know, when people talk about where is God in the hard things, when you've experienced hell on earth, it's hard to talk about a God of love and life. Luckily, my parents, we moved from Arlington Heights to Oswego, Illinois. And so I was taken away from that situation. I thank God every day for that. But as you can imagine, an 8-year-old kid, 2 years spent in that closet, it was rough. And I was a very silent kid because I just put it all inside. And actually what I ended up doing was I realized that there was an outlet for my anger, and it was football. And I beat the shit out of whoever I was against. And it was allowed and tolerated and like uplifted. So I was like, I'm doing this shit. And I was really good at it. Inflicting pain so others would feel my pain. Well, unfortunately, I had an injury and my IT band snapped my junior year as I'm being recruited. And all those friends and coaches that I thought had my back, all of a sudden they didn't give a shit what I was going through. I was disposable. I was no longer providing anything for the team. And so I had to go through a year of therapy on my own, angry and alone. Once again, God had abandoned me. My religion, I threw away. Catholicism, my religion of sports, I threw away. And I was that lost kid. The only school who kept their scholarship, because everyone else had left, was Augustana College, D3 school. The right one's in Rock Island, the wrong one's in Sioux Falls, but that's just that's a thing. I show up, again, just lost and angry, not knowing what I'm going to do with myself, and a campus pastor and a little nun, Sister Marilyn, see me, and I guess I had like lost, angry kid written all over my face, and they said, I'm going to make sure I hone in on this kid. And so they did, man. I could not go anywhere without having Sister Marilyn like walk next to me. What the hell's wrong with you? And she did. She'd invite me to chapel. I'm like, I'm not coming to chapel. I'd rather drink and hang out with friends. It'd be cool. And the campus pastor would, again, same thing, just come after me. Why don't you come to Bible study? Yeah, how about not? Sister, why don't you come and read in chapel? Sister, I don't even come to chapel. Why do you want me to read? But their persistence, and it was a mission trip. They said, okay, you're not coming to church, you're not going to Bible study, but I bet you'll enjoy getting your hands dirty. And so we went to Juarez, Mexico. I didn't know a single person on this trip. The first night we got there, we were told how dangerous these people are. Awesome, cool. And so I'm introduced like our assignments, and one of them is a orphanage. I'm like, okay, I can do kids. Like that's something I can do. So I volunteered at an orphanage, 30 kids with, again, very, very loving Catholic nuns. Catholic nuns somehow are a part of my story. Who knew? The third day we were there, by then I had really bonded with this boy, Mateo. There was a cartel shooting, and some of the boys were caught up in it. And one boy in particular was in critical condition and needed a blood transfusion. And so the nuns are kind of explaining what had happened. Of course, my campus pastor and Sister Marilyn are trying to like call home and say, hey, the kids are okay. Like, we might have to come home early. And as we're kind of figuring out, one of the nuns comes in and says, we need a blood transfusion or else this little boy's going to die. And they ask, the kids, would any of you be willing? And Mateo raises his hand. Like, oh, good for you, Mateo. That's awesome. That's my time. Holy shit, 2 minutes. Wait, it's only been 2 minutes, or I have 2 minutes? Okay, here we go. All right. Get going, Pat. Well, I'm going to tell you, long story short, Mateo won't go in the van unless I come with him. And again, can I not? So my campus pastor says, okay, if you're going to go, I'm going to go with you. So we go together. And we get to the hospital, and again, I'm in over my head, don't know what I'm doing there. Mateo's holding my hand, and he's just crying. I'm like trying to tell him really bad jokes, and I'm pretty sure there's a language barrier, and we're kind of just trying to make through this moment. And he turns to my pastor and says, how long until I die? 6 years old. My whole world was just, that's the kind of love I want to live with. Mateo is why I'm a pastor. He showed me the type of God that we have, that I had missed all those years. And that's the God that brings all of humanity out of our closets, help us find our authentic voices. The world steals them. Violence steals them. Empire steals them. Tyrants steal them. You and I, we get to be a part of bringing voice back to God's people, helping people see the beauty in them. Finally, we got to tell Mateo, like, you too get to live, right? He just gave me a hug. We live in a world right now where we're not even willing to lay down opinions for the other. Mateo will never be well known. I'll tell you what, man, he was worth knowing. And there's something about that that I just want to live a life that I help other people know you don't have to be well known, but be worth knowing. Amen.
That was an incredible story. I've also never felt like God's timekeeper. So. Thank you. Usually there's a draft and then I read it. But that was. Our next storyteller tonight is Michelle. No, Megan. I'm very sorry. Megan. Megan was born in Chicago's uptown neighborhood and grew up in the suburbs. She now lives in Aurora with her incredible spouse, Melissa, to whom she's been happily married for over 35 years. Wow. Almost as old as I am. Just kidding. I'm older than that. Proof that true love and a good dose of patience can stand the test of time. But don't mistake her for just another Illinois native. Her one claim to fame? A legendary appearance on the local children's TV show Garfield Goose in the 70s. This, of course, means that she has peaked early in life. Her favorite quote, fitting for tonight, is "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." Please welcome Michelle onto the stage. Megan, my God! Megan.
It was part, isn't really my story, so I guess we could consider it a preface page. But I was watching a interview with Jennifer Boylan, and she was talking about life after transitioning, and she had this to say, kind of describing what her life was now. And she said, it's not an easy life, it's hard. And yet it's also a life that turned out to be a gift because it gave me stories to tell that had not been told before. So the story I'm telling tonight is one such story. Why do you do that? My spouse asked me this question one night many years ago. Why do I do what? I mumbled. I leaned over the sink and spit in the sink and then rinsed my toothbrush. Brush your teeth with your eyes closed. Why do you close your eyes? She asked again. I don't know, just a habit, I guess, I responded. That was partly true. It was a habit and a means to avoid pain. Because if I opened my eyes, I'd have to look in the mirror. And the face staring back, it wasn't mine. That face was masculine. It had whiskers, hard edges, bushy eyebrows, and a prominent beak-like nose in the middle of it all. Every glance in the mirror was a reminder that the gender dysphoria, that feeling of mismatch between my gender identity and the parts I was born with, was not going away. Every night this ritual was less about dental hygiene and more about self-preservation. With my eyes closed, I could forget, even if just for that minute or two, the discord between the person I knew myself to be and the face that the world insisted was mine. Each night as I blindly brushed my teeth, I wondered how much longer I could bear the weight of a mask that felt cemented onto my skull, a mask that was never mine to wear. It was a constant reminder of a secret, the secret that I had determined was going to take to the grave, but instead it nearly took me to an early grave. After almost a half century of keeping it buried deep inside me, it rose to the surface. There was nothing I could do to keep it a secret any longer. No longer fighting it, things began to change. Long, tear-filled discussions took place. Therapy sessions were attended. Medications were prescribed. And appearances began to change. The closely cropped hair that I had since childhood was soon replaced with hair just below my ears. My hair had officially entered the awkward stage. If you've ever grown your hair out, you know what I'm talking about. That liminal space between what was and what will soon be. I tucked the long hair behind my ears, as if to tell any onlookers, nothing to see here, folks. Just a guy who is in desperate need of a haircut. One evening, my spouse and I had just finished dinner at Baker Square. We were both eyeing the pie menu. We had made our choice, and the waitress appeared ready to take our order. Do you two ladies want to order some dessert? I hesitated for a moment, my brain trying to process what I had just heard. Did she say ladies? My spouse and I gave her our orders and she left. Immediately, my spouse leaned toward me across the table, squinting her eyes as if she was trying to see through a fogged up window. She stammered, "What? How? What did that waitress see? What am I missing?" As I sat there, stunned, a small, hopeful part of me began to whisper that perhaps the world was starting to see me as I was struggling to see myself. It was as if some cosmic change had started. Something in the universe had shifted. Soon, cashiers at Walmart, nurses at the doctor's office, the guy at Jiffy Lube, and riders who I picked up when I was driving for Lyft, they could see her. They saw Megan. I still saw something else, someone else. So why couldn't I see her? I looked in the bathroom mirror, straining to see what had changed. Nothing looked different to me. I closed my eyes and brushed my teeth. Fast forward to just after the pandemic, my hair, now highlighted, straight, and just touching my shoulders, stood in stark contrast to the male clothes that I wore to work and the very male name that my coworkers knew me as. If my coworkers could see Megan, they weren't saying anything. I later asked a coworker who was hired during this time if he suspected that I was transitioning. He said he did, but he couldn't figure out which way I was going. He said that I looked female, but my boss introduced me to him using my then legal name, which was a male name. After coming down with COVID and not having the energy to straighten my hair after I washed it, I decided to let it air dry. Being my birth mom's child, I inherited some of her curly hair genes. And just like that, I adopted the curly hair lifestyle. So now I was showing up to work with highlighted, shoulder-length curly hair and the teeniest, tiniest pierced earrings, but wearing men's clothes and answering to a male first name. Talk about cognitive dissonance. A Facebook friend told me once, "You aren't coming out at work, you're leaking out." You'd think by then I would begin to see Megan when I looked in the mirror, but I still struggled to see her. Vendors who came to our office saw Megan sitting there. At the conclusion of a presentation by the company that installed our new phone system, the rep who I had spoken to many times and knew my first name responded to a coworker's question. My coworker asked if he was going to leave behind documentation for the new equipment. "Yes," the rep responded. "I'll leave everything with her before we go." He pointed in my direction. There were no other women seated in that corner of the room. The two women who worked in accounting turned toward me with eyebrows raised, paused, and then looked back to the presenter. But yet I still struggled to see Megan in the mirror. Soon I took on a part-time job at the discount retail store in Burlington, a place where I could finally just be Megan. No questions, no hesitation, just ma'am and miss and Megan. I would race home from my day job, change clothes, put on some makeup, grab something to eat, and spend my evenings picking clothes up off the floor and putting them on hangers. The Spanish-speaking folks in the area made up a large part of our customers. Quite a few of our cashiers were bilingual, and it wasn't unusual to hear Spanish spoken at the checkout line or throughout the store. One evening, a mom wheeled past me in the aisle with her child in the baby seat of the cart. She was focusing on the merchandise. The young child looked at me as they made their way down the aisle. They had just moved past me when the boy pointed his chubby little finger at me, smiled, and said in a tiny little voice, "Bella." His mom stopped, turned toward me to see who he considered Bella. She smiled at me and then moved on. I wanted to believe him. I so wanted to believe that I was Bella, that I was beautiful, but I still struggled to see what that child saw. I had a theory that I called the frame of reference theory that helped me understand why others saw me as female, while I struggled to see what they saw. People who saw me without any frame of reference saw me as female, even if I was wearing men's clothes and not wearing any makeup. They didn't know my legal name. They didn't know what gender was on my birth certificate. Their only clue was what they saw briefly with their own eyes. Small features, short height, small hands, and long hair. For myself, I had decades of memories of that face and hair. I knew what name I was given at birth. I knew what gender was on that birth certificate. That frame of reference locked me into perception that even when the general public would see female, I still saw mostly male. I ended that part-time job in June. In July, I made a trip to Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. I was wheeled into the OR for round one of gender-affirming facial surgery, where a Harvard-educated plastic surgeon cut me ear to ear, peeled my scalp back, peeled my lower face down to the bridge of my nose to access my eye socket, and went to work. He took a grinding tool to the bony eyebrow ridge that was the result of going through male puberty, and then used that same tool to widen and enlarge my then narrow eye sockets. He lifted my eyebrows, made a weak attempt to grind down my Adam's apple, and then sewed me back up. About 3 months after the trip to Northwestern, I was in Madison, Wisconsin at the University of Wisconsin for round two. It was surreal to sit in front of the computer as the doctor designed the nose that would soon replace the beak-like nose with a droopy tip that was a prominent feature of my face. He would move his mouth and make changes, ask me what I thought, and continue to manipulate the digital image of my face. I was soon looking at a simulation of a similar nose with a straight, refined ridge featuring a slightly upturned tip. About a week after that, it was the surgeon's turn to undo the damage that male puberty had done. He added some fat here, lifted my lip there, replaced my straight, almost non-existent upper lip with something plumper that featured a cupid's bow right in the middle. He reshaped my nose, and he also took a turn trying to grind down my Adam's apple. 10 days later, I was back at work like nothing ever happened. This was the time after the pandemic where you could wear a face mask all day at the office, and no one really seemed to think it was odd. I used that time to hide my healing bruises and scars and my new nose. During sessions with my therapist, my confidence in my appearance would very often come up. I would share stories of being gendered correctly by total strangers, and then weeks later I would tell her I was struggling because I thought I didn't pass. I didn't appear feminine enough. There would be a pause, and suddenly my therapist would look like she was about to launch herself out of her chair on the other side of the room. She gripped the arms of the upholstered chair, regained her composure, sat back, and would then recite back to me the stories that I told her of being gendered correctly. Now, after hearing all of this, do you still believe that you don't appear as someone who should be gendered as female? I would sheepishly admit that these stories of validation should overrule my feelings of gender dysphoria. But it continued to be a struggle, and it's one that many of my trans siblings struggle with. It seemed like a never-ending struggle until that night at McDonald's. I was out earning a little extra money doing Uber Eats, and I accepted an order at McDonald's. When I arrived, the lot was full, so I pulled around to a side lot that was still darker than the other areas of the lot. I went in to pick up the order. When the order was ready, I grabbed the bag, and while walking toward the door, I was looking at the app on my phone to see where I was heading with the customer's food. I reached for the door, heading into that dark lot, and just happened to look up as my hand was on the bar to push the door open. What I saw next really freaked me out. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman with a kind face framed by shoulder-length hair appeared at the door. It snapped me out of my brain fog I was in. If I would have pushed that door open, I would have hit her. I stopped and realized I was in her way. I stepped back and moved out of her way to let her in first. but she didn't come in. It was at that point I realized that the woman with the kind face and shoulder-length hair was me. Her eyes met mine with a silent conversation of recognition and acceptance. I had been mistaken my reflection for what I thought was a woman on the outside. It was as if time stood still. It was as if in that brief moment of time when I was getting out of her, or should I say, getting out of my own way, a veil had been lifted. That veil of gender dysphoria that had clouded my vision for years was gone. In that instant, that night, things finally shifted. I could see her now. I could see Megan looking back. That night I discovered that sometimes, when we are struggling to make a personal change to a behavior, we just need to get out of our own way.
Give it up for Megan. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Our next and maybe last storyteller is Brian. Brian is a father of four, a lawyer at a big law firm. I don't know, that's the only way to say that. And one of the people who helped start a new way, including as her own pro bono legal counsel. Before starting his career, Brian interned at the ACLU and the EEOC, and he has been a volunteer poll observer in the last two presidential elections. Wow, I'm glad you were alive. But he's got plenty of other interests. He's an accomplished barbershop quartet singer, an awards-winning sports writer, and he has way more tattoos than you can see in that outfit. He has also appeared on Chicago Fire. Please welcome Brian to the stage.
I'm going to take this off here. All right. So thanks, everybody, and thanks for all the amazing stories tonight. You guys are awesome and inspiring. I am perhaps the least likely person ever to speak at an Outspoken event. I am a straight, white, cisgender, married Christian man who grew up in Southwest Ohio. And for those of you from Illinois who don't know much about Southwest Ohio, just know that I grew up in the same county as J.D. Vance. All right? Yeah, John Boehner was my congressman growing up. My home county in the last election went 63% for the orange asshole. All right? So when I tell you I've come a long way in 300 miles, that's what I mean. And listen, I know what I look like. You can put a MAGA hat and a polo shirt on me and just drop me right into a Trump rally. Nobody would notice. I have resting, fiscally conservative face. I get that. In fact, the first time I marched in the Aurora Pride Parade, my friend Terry looked me up and down and said, "You might be the straightest person in this whole parade." But despite all of that, I am a proud ally of the queer community. Thank you. Now, I actually get a lot of people who ask me why, which I think is a weird question, but they always want to find some sort of connection. They're like, oh, is one of your kids in the LGBTQ community? Or do you have a brother who's gay? Do you have a sister who's trans? The answer to all of those is no. But I've settled on this kind of radical position that you can have empathy and respect for people, even when it doesn't directly affect you. And thank you. But to be clear, like, being an ally isn't something really in my mind that should be heroic. In my mind, it's the absolute least you can do to support the marginalized groups in your community. And given that tonight is a night for LGBTQ plus stories, I wanted to walk you through some of the folks in the queer community in my life who've helped shape who I am and my worldview. And I just want to say, frankly, there's a lot of you in this room who fit that description. We won't have time to get through everybody, but just know that I'm so appreciative to all of you who have had time to spend time with. Now, to be clear, it took me a while to figure out there were queer people in my life. Now, sure, my middle school band director did live with her adult female friend for decades. And yes, one of my cousins brought his longtime male roommate to family reunions. And sure, some of the guys in the all-male chorus that I sang in with my dad never seemed to have any wives or girlfriends around. But I didn't know any people in the community. And here's the thing, in addition to being from Southwest Ohio, I've got more bad news. My family was all from Texas. So suffice to say that the spaces I grew up in were not like this group. Now, church fellowship halls, this is a place where I spent a lot of time. This is my jam, right? I was in church choirs, I was in youth groups, praise bands, bell choirs, clown troops. If you haven't clowned for Christ, folks. And I've been on mission trips to places exotic as downtown Cincinnati and Kentucky. And, thank God we teenagers were there to spread the good news. In fact, somewhere in a box in my mom's basement is a lapel pin that I have for 6 straight years of perfect attendance at Sunday school. And try not to be too jealous, but each year you were able to add a new link so it dangled down your shirt when you wore it. Honestly, it was fabulous. And now that I think about it, between my bits of flair and the all-male chorus putting on stage makeup, maybe my formative years were more queer-coded than I realized. And perhaps that's why, even though I was a well-known church kid in those days, my friend Steve felt comfortable coming out to me as being gay. And as far as I can recall, he's the first gay person who ever actually shared that part of himself with me. And looking back now, I wish I had been more prepared for what he probably needed in that moment, because I am sure my response was weird and awkward and a little too churchy. See, Steve was in the band with me, and one day after school we were talking. He confided in me that he had been secretly meeting up with an older boyfriend in the mall parking lot to have sex. Now listen, guys, my true love Boyd's brain almost exploded in that moment. Sex? A boyfriend? The mall parking lot? Are we what? And I remember being puzzled because Steve went to homecoming in the fall with our group and he had a girlfriend. How could this be? It was obviously took me far longer than it should have to realize how difficult all of this must have been for Steve. He was trying to fit in by talking about girls, hiding who he really was, and putting himself in dangerous situations with older men in parking lots. And here I was, the goody-goody Christian kid that he trusted enough to come out to. Looking back, I realized it took amazing courage and bravery from him. And then he asked me this. He said, "Do you think it's okay that I'm gay?" I remember my answer very well. I started by saying, "I would never judge you for who you are." And I screamed back in time at 17-year-old Brian, and I say, "Stop there! Don't say anything else. That's the right answer." But then I added, "But I'm not sure what God would think." What a fucking asshole I was, right? And I didn't even think much of it at the time, because that's the world I lived in. But I've thought many times about it over the years. And I'm happy to say that I didn't chase Steve away when I said that. Probably should have. We continued to be friends. He continued to share his true self with me. I'm happy to say he lives today as a happily married gay man. But I often wonder how much harm I did to Steve's relationship with the church, if that's something he wanted, with those 8 simple words. And I hope that that's something that he did want, that he was able to get past it. Now you fast forward through college and law school, where I did a lot of growing up. Leslie and I got married and moved to Naperville. And we spent 13 years in a church that we were told was a safe and inclusive space, only to learn that it absolutely was not. After a particular Sunday sermon made that painfully and abundantly clear, Leslie and I left the church along with a lot of other people, some of whom are here today. And shortly thereafter, there was a gathering of those church refugees to talk about how we felt and what to do next. And that night was the first time I met Terry. And it stood out to me because at one point we're all going around in a circle talking about why we were there and why we felt like we had to take a stand. Some people had children in the community. Some people had friends to stand up for. Some just felt it was morally wrong. And then we came to Terry, who said in a tone I would soon become very familiar with, "Well, I'm the only actually queer person in the room, so that's why I'm here." That got a laugh, kind of like it did now, but it made me pause. It has to be a lot easier to crusade on behalf of others than it is to crusade for yourself. It takes so much courage to stand up and say, "I deserve better." But if you know Terry, you know he's never one to back down or to lack courage or to step back from a fight. So it's no surprise to me now that he was in that room. And before you know it, some of the folks in that room were joining up with other folks to start a new way. Now, I know Terry has spoken and outspoken a few times. Many, maybe most of you are familiar with his story. If you're not, sit and talk to him sometime. He's got so many great stories. I couldn't begin to tell you his story the way he can, but I will say that having Terry become part of our lives has been an absolute blessing. We come from very different backgrounds, right? And have very different life experiences. I don't think you have a church attendance pin, to my knowledge. But I've learned a ton from him. I know my kids have too. And one of the things I've learned about getting to know Terry and about the whole New Way community and the Outspoken community and everyone else in general is that the more you surround yourself with members of the queer community, the more it strengthens my appreciation for the Holy Spirit, the human spirit, but also my faith in religion. Because for me, it's never been a challenge for me to get up every day and live my life. It just hasn't. And I listened to the speakers early tonight, and everyone's gone through difficult challenges. I've been very lucky and very privileged. No one has ever questioned my right to exist, my right to love who I want to love, or my right to worship and lead in churches. Remember, I've got this, we'll let you off with a warning face going. But surrounding myself with people who have everything stacked against them in our messed up society and who still go out and fight for who they are is humbling and inspiring to me. And I know a lot of folks here may not care about church stuff, and that's cool. But being in church spaces with people who have been told that they aren't loved by God, only to show up and fight for their faith anyway, is amazing. Now, I've got one more story of courage that I wanted to share, and that's my friend Madison. Madison is a trans woman about my age who is actually one of my college roommates. She just came out last year and has been incredibly courageous in sharing her story on social media. And she also lives in Kansas, which has been utterly terrifying for her, particularly now that Trump is in office. But I wanted to share her story of coming out from my perspective because it gives me some hope. See, we still have a typical college bro group chat. If you're not familiar with one of those, it's where all our college roommates stayed in touch and discussed such important topics as football and video games. And occasionally we get a happy birthday or a family announcement, but this is not the place where we share deep and emotional topics. And last spring I hit up the group chat with the question about whether it might be fun to go to the Mizzou Texas A&M football game in Texas. Bro stuff. And Madison responded by saying it wouldn't be safe for her to go, and then took a huge leap of faith by sending 4 straight cisgender white dudes that look like me a message that said this: I'm transgender. I started medically transitioning about 4.5 months ago. It's not something I really understood about myself until last fall, but it explains so much about my life. I've only told a few people so far, but I wanted you guys to know I'm going to be changing my name to Madison. And while I knew that wasn't going to change how I felt about my friend, my heart leapt in my chest. I mean, these are all what we straight folks call good dudes, but I wasn't sure how everyone would react. Frankly, I didn't know if anyone else in that group had much contact with the LGBTQ community. And my mind raced for a couple minutes until one of my buddies chimed in. And this is, mind you, a guy from rural Missouri who was homeschooled. So he said, I'm happy you're working towards a you that feels authentic and comfortable. I hope you know that you have our support, and I hope you're getting it from all the folks who support you. Thank God. I then chimed in with words of experience, and then another friend chimed in. Said, I'm happy you're finding comfort in life. Like the others, I'm always here to listen or support with whatever. Then another, so happy for you, Madison. Thanks for sharing with us. You know you always have our support. 4 for 4. That's what we needed within a matter of minutes. I was so proud of my college bros, and also more than a little relieved. And so I've learned so much from the LGBTQ community over my life, and all of you in this room have helped me evolve into a better version of myself. And I'm happy that you have accepted me into your spaces. I feel like a lot of times we talk about like, are we the mainstream folks creating safe spaces for you? But I've been welcomed into your spaces, and they're amazing spaces, and I've learned so much. And I hope my story will let you know that not every guy with this haircut is hateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brian's story reminds me of one of my new favorite things.
Make some noise if you're queer. Make some noise if you're an ally. Everybody else, shut the fuck up. All right, is it okay if I close this out this year? As I flipped through my CD case, I asked my 19-year-old self, which CD should you choose for your first job as a stripper? After a few more puffs of my cigarette, I narrowed my choice down to Lil Kim's Hardcore and Foxy Brown's El Nana. In the late 90s, Foxy Brown and Lil Kim, both from Brooklyn, dominated female hip hop with in your face sex appeal. They were the Thelma and Louise of rap, equating money, power, and sex. Foxy and Kim started out as friends, but soon they were rivals. Taking one more drag of my cigarette, I looked at Kim, and then I looked at Fox. Kim was killing Fox, but I always root for the underdog. So I decided Foxy and I were one, and she would be the soundtrack to my first job as a stripper. Stripper Daddy had found me on Manhunt, a gay dating site that I basically used as a grub hub for dick. I was going to school in Champaign-Urbana at the time, supposedly as an English literature major, but mostly as a raver who occasionally would read a book. Stripper Daddy said he was an A&R music representative. Wow. And he lived in one of those high-rise buildings along Chicago's Gold Coast. Whoa. The first message he sent me read, Posh Rice. That was my screen name because you can love hip-hop and the Spice Girls at the same time. Posh Rice. I find Asian boys very attractive, and I have a proposition for you. Have you ever stripped for money before? I would love to cover you in dollar bills. It's funny how my current self cringes at that message, but my 19-year-old self was like, oh my God, someone thinks I'm pretty enough to be a stripper? Though I thought I was cute, I knew the world, especially the gay world, thought little of me because I was Asian. See, there are no Asian porn stars or sex symbols. On Manhunt, I was often told something like, you're so cute, but I don't like Asian guys. So when Stripper Daddy asked me to be a stripper, I felt like I could break a glass ceiling, or at least a mirrored one. I had been chosen. But who had I been chosen by? I looked at Stripper Daddy's pictures and they weren't horrible. He was a big 6'4" and 250 pounds, and that can always be fun. He was definitely a daddy though, and not a dilf. Okay, Stripper Daddy wasn't someone I was attracted to, but I wasn't looking to date Stripper Daddy, nor was I going to fuck Stripper Daddy. I was just going to strip for Stripper Daddy. And Stripper Daddy had very detailed instructions about what was going to happen. All I had to do was have the following outfit ready: my street clothes, then underneath that some gym clothes, and finally a jockstrap. All I'd have to do was dance and gyrate over him while he lay naked on the floor and jerked himself off. It usually took half an hour, no more than an hour, he said, and I would make $100. I tossed the idea around in my head, but I knew I was going to do it because ever since I saw my first porn, I had secretly fantasized about being a sex worker. Now, I think fantasized is a key word here because even when I was younger, I knew that my fantasy career of going into the office for an orgy was very different from the real life consequences of monetizing your sexuality, which probably involved a lot of tears, hot showers, and scraping myself with a pumice stone to get the shame off. But this seemed like a chance to peek into that world, and I was 19 years old, which meant I was really good at making horrible decisions. My mother was like, be a doctor. My father was like, be a lawyer. And I was like, no, I'm gonna be a hoe. You know what makes a really good icebreaker? A Grammy nomination form and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. I walked into Stripper Daddy's building so nervous, I nearly wrote down the word stripper when the doorman asked me to sign in. I rode an elevator up to the 14th floor and walked through a stunning hallway. Upon opening Stripper Daddy's door, I cringed at his face before rearranging mine into neutral. When I saw framed records on the wall, however, I suddenly felt relieved that Stripper Daddy really was an A&R music executive. High-rise check, A&R job check. Everything's gonna be fine. Then he pulled out a Grammy nomination form and poured me a glass of bubbles to settle my nerves. Drunk with power, I filled in Foxy Brown for every category possible. And I may be the reason Foxy Brown has one Grammy nomination to her career. After I chugged that second half of my glass, it was time to get to work. As he said he would, Stripper Daddy took off his clothes and lied on the floor. I put Il Nana in his stereo and whipped my buzzed head around. Now, like any child of a dragon mother, I had practiced thoroughly for this job, which mostly involved me watching Showgirls and pretending to be Jessie Spano. I also practiced the rave dance moves I was so fond of at the time. But I had not anticipated everything. At home, I had only practiced for a few minutes at a time, and now I had a whole CD to get through. I was down to my jockstrap in less than 10 minutes and beginning to worry. And then I looked at Stripper Daddy's face. He was so happy. He oohed and ahed while throwing money at me, and I was like, oh my God, do I have a gift? I think that I have a gift. When the CD ended, I hopped up from my cowgirl position and smiled. That was fun. We're not done yet. Oh, do you want me to start the CD again? No, you need to get me off. Now my current self is like, oh, Archie, you were so naive. But my 19-year-old self was scrambling through my memory for that file of our conversation. You didn't say I had to do that. Yes, of course I did. Come on. You said you would fucking do this. In my head, I could hear Foxy and Kim telling me what to do. They would have me pull back my foot and kick him barefoot in the balls. While he groaned in pain, I would put my clothes back on and collect my cash. Striding through the living room, I would take a frame record from the wall and smash it on the floor. As I opened the door, I would turn around and yell, "Never fuck with a Brooklyn bitch!" I wish I had done that, or even something remotely close. But sometimes I would just have this tendency to do whatever it takes to calm angry people down. Sometimes I fell back on this tendency. Instead of standing up for myself that day, fearful of his 6'4" reaction, and inclined to please someone who had just given me $100, I grabbed his dick and jerked it. And then I felt his palm on the back of my head. And soon I was doing more than I ever meant to do. The next few minutes felt longer than the whole CD. Stripper Daddy came, I wiped my mouth, picked up the money crumpled on the floor, got dressed, and left. As I rode that slow elevator down, I counted up the bills. $84. I hadn't even been fully paid. I was the worst sex worker in the world. The elevator doors opened and my heart felt like a 1-ton pebble. But if I could tell my 19-year-old self anything as I walked to the car, it'd be this. It's okay that you were the worst sex worker in the world. Not everyone is meant to be a sex worker. Not everyone is that tough, and you are not, yet. You're gonna make mistakes, but you'll get there. And one day, you'll be able to laugh at 95% of this story because you have learned that some people do shitty things. But you, Archie, have this amazing ability to turn tears into laughter. And that other 5%, that was not your fucking fault. Thank you, everyone. All right. How are you? Why don't we have the storytellers come back up onto the stage? Allison, if you want. Joe. Everybody else. Megan, Michelle, Brian, and Patrick. And thank you. Make some noise for yourselves for coming tonight on this last day of the month of love. And then.
Oh yeah, they're gonna get a grab picture. So I will grab a picture. I have a phone and I can do anything. Well, I'm not gonna be in the picture, so I'll do it. You all, thank you so much for coming. Just stand 1 second. Thank you for coming. Feel free to grab some more food on your way out.